as we move beyond the limits of human explored space and the 3 paralleling worlds, we once more have bonus missions to deal with. Yeah, I know, it's just how the timing keeps working out.
The first is Power to Pierce Through Darkness, set right before the crews take off for the NCC dimension, with several of the crew taking time off to see their civilian friends. Of note being Setsuna meeting again with Saji and Louise, as they're still busy running Nadesco engineer Uribake's company in his current absence. Graham has tagged along and dragged Joe with him to socialize and rehabilitate him from his former obsession, similar to how Graham himself had to be rehabbed back from his Mr. Bushido persona. And what better way to get his problems out of his system than by confronting some of XF's subordinates who come to attack them. While they show off the ground assault, of course the hired goons call in their giant robots, leading to Joe heading an assortment of the 80 Dimensions aces against them. Unfortunately, they find that their mechs have been treated with anti-beam coated armor that makes them resist even the most powerful energy fire they have.
So, half the units here have energy weapon resistant armor. Attack him with physical attacks. It's not like this is the Strike Freedom fighting the Barbados.
衝撃を軽減するバリアブルフェイズシフト走行なあ全力で来いシュート行きます
Actually, yeah, that's exactly what they suggest doing. And since the Goon's mech is designed by Wolfgang, and Wolfgang always builds a trick into his robots, well, it's natural that it would be weak to what Wolfgang considers his greatest weapon, that is mounted at the bow of Joe's Goryu.
ゴーリュの奥の手を見せてやる。逃がしはしない。貫か！
But as the battle wraps and the crew head back to finish preparations, we also see Sally quitting her job at the factory, arguably her longest continuous employment, as she's been offered the chance to join the support crew of the Earth Fleet Tenku, and wants to spend more time close to Maito. The second bonus mission set around here is Bellicose Star C, and it's actually a training mission for all the ship captains in naval operations. See, even in their own series canons, all of these ships are normally independent operators and do not serve as part of larger fleet actions. At best, the Eternal has seen activity as part of the Three Ships Alliance, but even that tenure didn't last that long. Thus, some naval drills against some soft targets of the Gamelan fleets makes sense, both from a story and a gameplay perspective, since most of the ships are by default slower than the mobile units and are more used to, at this point, fighting other mobile units as opposed to ship-to-ship combat.
Which would again be different if the Archangel were here. Seriously, the Archangel is a badass ship, and it has shown as much in prior Super World Wars games, as well as the G Generation games, that fact.
艦長、ローエングリーン、スタンバイ OK です。
ローエングリーン、
Knowing how to work among so many ships in a battle is important as well, since most captains are alpha personality types normally, and allows Akito to flex his fleet command muscles once again. Really, this stage is just fun, and gets you to know a bit more about the ships you might have not used in the game for one reason or another, particularly in my case the Rock Kalium, Nahal Argama, and 12th Day Danan. They don't have much story central spotlight or give special skills to use, like Ptolemy has with its same turn attacks, the Eternal with boosting the capabilities of the Seed units, or in the Nadesco with System Seizure. Though of the three forgotten ships, the Danan is the best in the regards that it has insanely long weapons range with it launching intercontinental ballistic missiles. With that all done, we're finally back on course for Iskandar, us arriving at the outer limits of the Milky Way galaxy thanks to the various types of LTL technology made available between dimensions, making their trip take vastly less time.
I should hope so. They first ended up ported to the AD dimension a month into the trip, and they've spent the last 4 months dealing with the messes in the AD and UC dimensions. Yeah, everything that's happened since Stage 8 has been in the course of 4 months.
This is also the point by which Melda is finally released from our care, finally going back to the Gamelons now that she can be picked up by their forces, and hopefully avoid the hell out of us from here on out, so she won't have to fight those she's come to see as friends. Especially Akira, who she totally isn't interested in! Still, this brings up another plot point from Yamato. How do they know the way to Iskandar without a guide? Well, as I said way earlier in these reviews, it turns out the Yamato is being guided by an automatic navigation system supplied by the Shaw sisters to get them there, though they are uncertain how far the journey will take. Fortunately, as we reach the outermost edge of the galaxy, we find a gigantic intergalactic gateway right before us.
Crap, I've seen the tail end Stargate series. Guys, don't open it. You only welcome into the galaxy religious fanatics that worship ascended beings as gods. Wait, right. Stargates only work one way at a time. Never mind, opening it will prevent those dicks from dialing in.
Actually, I'm not that far off. From the systems installed in the gate, they can tell the direction in which the other end will let out, and it's in the direction they're going. So even factoring their faster travel into things, using this gate will still save them an immense amount of time. Unfortunately, a Gamelan stealth unit has infiltrated the fleet, while Kodai and Yuki are off in its control units, and the infiltrators have the ability to render other races unconscious for as long as they want.
Which, considering new types should be resistant to such externally applied mental attacks, as it is only supposed to work on non-psychics, I once again declare new type special abilities to be
Useless ass psychic powers!
Fortunately, 9 and the rest of the AI members of the crew are completely unaffected. Thus 9 gets Soji up, and the two confront the infiltrators and get them to knock this the hell off, alongside another member of the Yamato crew named Misaki that was also rendered immune, though not through any ability she herself has. See, Misaki is currently being possessed by the entity that is in Yamato's automatic navigation system, the first of the Shaw sisters to visit Earth, Eurisha.
As I detailed at the beginning of this, Eurisha, like Sasha, was injured, but not killed like her sister was. She was put in critical condition in an incident unrelated to Gamelan aggression, the same one that rendered Yuki partially amnesiac, but was saved by being placed in an intensive care pod. That was then installed into the Yamato, so the ship's navigation system could use her brainwaves to backtrack the route she herself used to get to Earth, not just to get them to Iskandar for the Cosmo Reverse, but also in hopes that the more advanced Iskandarian tech could save her life. Turns out, with everything that's happened, she's been recovering on her own in the pod, and used her connection to the ship and alien powers to spectate periodically through it. And yeah, she's seen everything that we've done.
And it's actually because of these events that she wakes up and can direct us to Iskandar herself now, while acting once again as the active observer in our midst, guiding the journey.
Because she does so here, she also completely subverts a subplot from Yamato about a crew mutiny, tied to that whole Izumo plan subplot. The heads of that believing Yuki was actually an amnesiac Eurisha due to their coincidental resemblance. Obviously not so much here, where we're crowded with a lot of stuff at the moment.
But because Eurisha's now awake, we should see her most interacting with 9, noticing how much she is an incomplete being, and unfortunately picking at a scabbed over wound about 9's own existence and her own work to fill that void, and that missing percent of herself that makes her deem herself a failure. And I don't feel like she's doing it on purpose, as she later has to backtrack on her words in a way that starts 9 thinking about what she's actually gaining from these experiences of hers along this journey. This is also where we finally face off against the man the Gamelans refer to as the Space Wolf, someone who has not come up since the beginning of the game as our next major Gamelan enemy, the man's name being Damel. And Damel from his bits here seems like a better, more respectable enemy than our previous Gamelan foes. Despite trying to subjugate us while asleep, but it's a more painless takeover and surrender than the genocide the prior ones have been carrying out. An attempted bloodless one too. But when that fails, it falls back to ship combat.
Forgetting, of course, that, well, we have mobile suits. And here's the thing that was forgotten in a lot of the Gundam series that are not named Gundam Seed unless they're equipped with some weapon of mass destruction. The mobile suit's original purpose was to be masters of anti-ship warfare, evading the slower shots from ships and moving themselves outside of their fields of fire to then rapidly close in faster than they can respond and thus sink the ship. Hell, that is a larger reason why several Gundams in Seed onwards have ridiculously long melee weapons that are literally named anti-ship swords. They wanted to go back to that and showcase a realistic weapon that could be used in sinking ships, and a longsword that can cut deep into the hulls of a ship makes insane sense for that. And that's not even getting to how they can deal overwhelming rapid beam fire.
Not content to let us crush the Gamelons, we've got a complication come in with the Gardim, who are likewise tracking us for further analysis. Jamie having shoved Chitose in a special unit named Medivia Deg, and directed her at us of her own free will. Whatever Chitose has learned while in Gardium's hands has unsettled her, them having convinced her that they need to take possession of the Yamato for everyone's benefit.
Thing is, the Gardim have not exactly shown themselves to be good people throughout all of this, and not just because of all the AI drones. They have no real understanding of emotion, no true moral values. Their entire racist mindset that is depicted through their AI is one that is highly rigid and driven towards an efficiency over value of life system. And yeah, every single one of them we've seen is an AI. It's plausible that they didn't program the AI drones of their race to have a proper emotional range or values that reflect their races. But the thing is, I know where this goes, and they don't. Thus, Chitose, or Soji when you're playing with Chitose as the main character instead, being convinced to work with them like this, it never seems to fit right beyond them believing that the Gardim themselves have the planetary restoration technology they need, and this being easier than finding a mythical planet in the far reaches of space. But again, that ties into Yamato's theme of people's salvation being earned through their own efforts to show themselves as worthy of being entrusted with a future.
And this isn't quite character assassination for the one you didn't choose either. Them regretting all throughout this that they feel forced into this, but believe from what they know that there isn't a better way. It presents the character as just making a bad choice, and are fully salvageable as a character because of that, as opposed to those who do heinous acts and walk away from or abuse their friends with zero justification. So yeah, beat Chitose here to let her know that, no, we're not giving up without a good reason to stop, and just repeating Tetsuya's stint from the early game is not going to be enough. Also for tack points, don't forget to finish Damel's ship off, as in this stage he can just retreat in the confusion if you do not deal enough damage to his ship in your earlier attacks. I think the threshold for actually shooting down his ship is you have to deal the last 10,000 damage all in one go, otherwise he gets away and you lose the tack points when that happens. Something to look out for as he retreats to the other side of the space gate. Still, Soji's devastated that Chitose is on the other side now, but is resolved to find out why she's done this, and save her from herself, just as she seems to want. With this, we're all set to enter the space gate, and face what awaits on the other side. An entire Gamelon armada of 10,000 ships, which is currently undergoing a massive naval review overseen by a Gamalian official that is actually attempting to begin a coup against Gamelos' emperor, Dessler, who is behind this entire intergalactic conquest campaign in a fit of madness.
To summarize what is up with Dessler, Gamelons worship the Iskandarians, and Dessler's taken this all one step further and believes himself in love with Starsha, the eldest of the Shah sisters. And in an attempt to earn Starsha's love, he is campaigning to bring about Starsha's dream of universal peace by conquering all the races across the cosmos under Gamelon dominion. Thing is, Dessler doesn't really understand what love is, and is only really obsessed with her, and all his actions are likewise harmed by forcing his perspective of her desires without understanding the most basic elements of her dream. Thus, his subjugation of other races into the Gamelon caste system is all tainted fruit, and only further damaging Starsha's wishes to see a universe where people seek out to understand other people.
And in turn, some members of the Gamelos government are beginning to see that Dessler's insane, and are trying to organize against him, and it is not going well for them. Oh, they just appear to have killed him by destroying his flagship. But that's all a feint from his end to see who was after his head and who would attempt to take his place, while those conspirators finger and depose their political enemies in their claim to leadership. This whole coup causing Melda's father to be arrested and imprisoned under the lie that he's part of this. And that is not actually reversed when Dessler reveals he's still alive.
But really, Dessler doesn't need to do much to root out these traitors. After all, they're in our way. Literally the best scene in the damn series, and this whole stage is a recreation of it.
What's funny with this recreation, though, is the presence of the Shin-Getter Dragon. As well, it doesn't have the same tier of destructive power as the Wave Motion Gun, it is capable of being a planet killer, and possible to devastate en masse a fleet like this. Mix that with the aforementioned capabilities of mobile suits to devastate enemy ships in combat, plus the capabilities of our fleet killer units, and I see this dream team as more than capable of wiping out this entire armada without the Wave Motion Gun. For a lot of these units, they can just spam their wide-range attacks, and it'll be like shooting fish in a barrel.
The only way this could get even more extreme with the mass devastation we could deal here is if the Wing Zero, Double X, or Turn A were here to unleash their ultimate attacks. Or even better, the battleship units of Gao Gagar Final, just so we have an excuse to unlock and utilize that series' ultimate weapon, the Goldion Crusher! Because there is no overkill like this super robot whose final attack can blow up a sun. But it's not like we even need to do all of that. All we need to do is just cut a path straight through.
実戦上の敵を一掃するトランザル まとめて片付けるくそったれーパーフェクトキャノン発射出力ビーム私と船が沈むのかこの光の先に明日があるんだサンダーボルトブレイカー俺が闇を切り裂く光だ出し惜しみしている場合じゃない全弾打ち尽くす
艦首展開
撃ち方始め撃ち方始め両面増速黒二重増速黒二重ぶつかる覚悟で進めたーよし撃墜だ
Let's Like, there's not many stages among the 3 Super Robot Wars games I've been lucky enough to play where narratively the stakes are so stacked against us, and yet it is so satisfying to completely devastate the opposition. I can't think of many that top it, and they all involve slaughtering en masse massive numbers of space abominations where you can just cut loose and feel good about doing it. With the piece de resistance being...
Adjust course 180 degrees. Fire! They're missing all our ships. What are they aiming at? Retreat! Get us out of this system now!
With this, we have entered the Large Magellanic Cloud and are more than 3/4 of the way to Iskandar. But with it comes bad news. The support crews underestimated the number of spare resources we actually needed for this trip, thus triggering the secret scenario supporting a long journey. For first lap players, it's essential you have triggered this, as in almost every game near the end, there's a stage like this where special conditions are created for all enemies you fight in it to drop bonus boosting funds and attack points, beyond the boosted ratings you would get from deploying certain characters or from equipping special items onto units you regularly put in battle. In this case, our supply shortfall puts us directly in the path of one of Dessler's personal fleets. And according to intel we got from Melda earlier, they're always financed to the gills above and beyond any other division. However, they also happen to be commanded by rote incompetent yes-men, meaning it's easy money for us to strip them bare, which is only made better by every unit we have that can boost our earnings being deployed. This is also where the next pair of DLC missions occur. The first is Clash of the Mazine Redux, with Koji and Tetsuya having a brawl between them. First, to settle any lingering issues the nephew-uncle pair may have between them from earlier game conflict, and second, to make sure both of them truly have mastery over their respective Mazingers for the battles ahead, and to close a bit of the skill disparity between them, considering Tetsuya trained specifically to defeat Koji, with the Getter team on standby in the event things get taken too far. However, as a tracking device against the enemies of the Mycenae, a Kadora has long hidden itself inside the Mazine Emperor G, and chooses now to attack and take control over it away from Tetsuya, trapping him inside it.
Jeez, this thing happens literally all the time to Tetsuya across all the Mazinger media. I'm serious, it keeps happening. It even happened in the most recent film edition to the franchise, Mazinger Z Infinity, where Tetsuya and the Great Mazinger get hijacked so Dr. Hell can control a Mazinger that's so big that the normal Mazingers are comparable to the control jets that dock into their heads in respective sizes. And Tetsuya getting thrashed like that? Well, it's pretty much used the same way every time, to make it so Koji has to come out of retirement or get back the will to fight.
And thematically, this is what this stage is about, as Koji has some lingering self-doubt left over from when Mazinger Zero almost consumed him. Well, he's got a handle on it enough that he's not at risk of losing control should Zero come out again. That doubt was nagging at him and led to him wanting this training session in the first place. And now it's put in jeopardy his uncle, and last resort option should Zero go nuts again. And yet, as Tetsuya berates him for having a weak resolve and not having the will to do what's necessary like he did, Koji refuses to lose anything that's precious to him ever again. Thus he unleashes Zero and goes straight on the attack.
What, did he think I was going to final breast nova him? We are trying to save Tetsuya, not deep fry him. Besides, what else was he going to learn from Shinji punching out Robot Cthulhu?
With Mazin Emperor G purged and Tetsuya back under control, the Kadora we killed calls more Kadoras for us to fight, and we mop them up pretty easily. Tetsuya noting that if Koji keeps on as he is, he's going to surpass him pretty soon. The second DLC mission this time is a desperate battlefield, and it is by far the most difficult mission in the game.
Oh yes, that is not an exaggeration. This is the only one I consistently mess up and have to do over again. Like, even on the hardest difficulty, if you put in the prep work, The hard mode stages aren't a problem unless you're implicitly going for the SR points, and even then, those can be pretty fair. Not so much with this stage.
This ties back to what I said earlier about 9 over time creating periodic simulation missions to test the strength of the crew, and is the terrestrial counterpart to a later space-based mission, where 9 throws literally every boss enemy we encounter straight in our faces. From the Angels to the Neo-Zeon forces to Dr. Hell's monsters, the Amalgam agents, to even the Eldritch abominations we face that are all acted as the true villains of the game's narrative. And why this beats out the later space-based one that includes endgame bosses is because of the inherent difficulty of the goal here. You have to defeat all of these enemies before they can reach the center of the map. And keep in mind, this would not be so bad if you could create an absolute defense line around the goal area, because you can't. But because their placement requires you to go out and hunt them down far before they reach the area, as they will ignore your units to move towards it if you place it wrong. Made worse is one, and only one unit in this, and it is once again the fake Red Comet himself, full frontal nudity. Frontal, using a Sinanju, can move twice in the same turn, meaning if you either ignore him for a turn by focusing on another enemy, or don't defeat him in the same turn you engage him, then his double move will allow him to reach the goal mark, and you will automatically lose. I can't even really give a lot of good recommendations on what to hit when, outside of me feeling the Amalgam units and the Angels being bigger threats than the rest. The Amalgam units because they're fast, but not as fast as the Sinanju, while the Angels have the highest defensive power among the units deployed, so it can just walk through you. Others on the map are slower in their movement speed, are easier to damage despite their hit points, or start farther away from the goal. So it's easier to intercept them and take them out before it's game over, but it's not easy even for the pilots in-universe, who will end up blaming Soji for putting them through this after 9 reveals she created the simulation, in the hopes it would be too hard for Soji and the others to actually beat. And when I say blame, I mean they give Soji the stink eye and make his life hell in the aftermath. And he can't even get back at 9 for it.
However, this is also where we run aground of the game's final route split. There's technically one more after this, but that one is connected to whether you want to obtain the normal or true game endings. The true ending taking the harder difficulty route to clear, but like the Londo Bell and Independent routes earlier, it's basically the same events, just with their order and placement along the timeline being a bit shuffled, so I don't need to recap both. For the reviews of the Super Robot Wars games, when the final route split happens, I'm just going to do the true ending every time. The problem though for that is, unless you perfect run the game the first time and trigger all the special events, you'll need to play the game twice to unlock it, which is an annoying time sink considering this is a 70-hour game to play through once. 40 hours if you skip all story segments. But in something like this, why would you skip those segments?
So yeah, this for me counts as the last route split where I need to do one side of the story and then backtrack to another save file to do the other. The idea coming from this route split, though, is the fleet detects some Gamelons made it through the space gate after them and is tailing them. Thus, they're going to split their forces to divert attention from themselves in an ambush before regrouping thanks to a device that Uribatake made that will allow them to boson jump back to the other fleet. The Yamato taking all the Gundam units with them as they're all superior combatants in space, while the Nadesico leads the more terrestrial-oriented super robots down to a nearby series of planets. However, the Yamato's doctor confirms that, even though they're just over 5 months total into the trip, Okita's health is starting to wane, requiring him to reveal his condition to the most experienced military officer among the fleet, Bright Noah, so in the event he can't command, Bright will take over for him in completing this mission and getting everyone home safe.
On one hand, this kind of intrudes on Kodai's character arc a bit, because he, for all intents and purposes, is Okita's successor in terms of meaningful commanders of the Yamato, especially with their mentor-mentee relationship. On the other, this makes logical sense for an expanded fleet to have a more coherent intership chain of command in regards to seniority that would fall to someone else.
And again, to the game's credit to show that it is extremely smart about all these story details as long as they don't involve the story failings of the Universal Century, they do acknowledge that specifically. That if it were just the Yamato, he would have placed in command Kodai, but he has to think of the bigger picture than just them. Again, Juzo Okita, hyper-competent badass. The rest of the crew, however, are having some reservations about continuing to poke the bear that is the Gamlas Empire. After all, they just need to get to Iskandar. Interaction with Melda does show that the Empire can be reasoned with if they can get them one-on-one. And interactions throughout the prior adventures have burned out a need for revenge from the NCC crew over the prior war. So shouldn't there be some way to not need to fight?
Again, no. Gamlas has been the aggressors throughout this. Yes, Earth fired the first shot, but everything after? They're not who kept shooting even past the point they tried to surrender.
A lot of this scene follows from that, a longer philosophical debate on how long you can keep having to fight a war, and it's one informed by the Titans/G-Hound members in once again showing why war in the Universal Century never ends. All of them basically coming down on the side of, it's not their place to judge who's an enemy, only to shoot who they're told to. Which once more explains so many of the atrocities committed in the Universal Century, as moral lines are not considered in their actions. Still, Setsuna sees this all as ultimately good, where the varying groups here can at least have a calm discussion about these disparate viewpoints.
Well, except for any position promoted by religious radicals, Nazis, and racial supremacists, or otherwise excuses to inflict oneself on others. That shit you need to shut down immediately because their arguments are always slanted in such a way to make anyone who does not agree with them the bad guy, and take a mile when you give them the slightest inch, even when their positions are morally and ethically unconscionable. A qualifier I feel I have to make because of the failure to understand that not every argument is equal across two sides, and there are positions that are indefensible. You have no idea the number of racial supremacists trying to kill us all I've had to deal with in just 2020 when I was writing this. Because there are some ideologies that are just plain harmful and should not be given a platform lest they use it to cause people actual harm.
But this whole tangent about Setsuna wanting people to continue to build bridges to seek true understanding comes up because, well, as the Gamelan fleet catches up to us, we get a certain intervention that is not the Gardeem, which interferes in the battle. And that intervening side comes to us in the form of a living metal shape-shifting entity that is drawn to those with enhanced psychic abilities. These are the ELS, or the ELS, the main antagonists of Gundam 00's movie, Awakening of the Trailblazer.
I did say they were showing up later. The ELS is a point of contention among Gundam fans. Some sects, particularly UC timeline purists, hating the idea of them existing. As to them, aliens should not exist in Gundam as they subvert the war story Gundam is about with their inhuman influence. My opinion? It's a good thing they exist, and they served a fantastic role in Gundam 00's story. Once again informing why 00 is one of the best Gundam series, as it actually dared to explore ground that Gundam hadn't before. And it's because of them that we've since gotten other good content that involves aliens in the story, such as Build Divers Re-Rise. I really liked Build Divers Re-Rise if you couldn't tell from all the kits up there, as their purpose is not about making an inhuman other to be an easy-to-hate antagonist, which aliens and even robots often are in fiction. Granted, the people who complain about them in my experience are those who like to see people murdered callously in stories, so I think there's other issues there unrelated to the aliens that they may be camouflaging behind that excuse.
The purpose of the ELS in Gundam is very simple. They are an enemy you cannot defeat through force. In 00, even with the Invaders and the Outlaws and their plot to enforce authoritarian rule and societal caste compartmentalization on the world defeated, the Earth government was in a position where it could easily fall back into the same cycle of authoritarian dictatorship maintained through control of the media that would prevent awareness of the world government committing atrocities in secret as people expanded out into space. The reformed Earth government had those same problematic overtones as the bad parts of UC Gundam, very concerns of peace through subjugation, with immense military might used to maintain it. Vulnerable people victimized into indentured servitude and slavery in the aftermath of prior wars, and those with expanded sense of being viewed as evolutionary elites turned into potential superweapons. The 00's Federation were standing on the edge of becoming just as bad as the rest of their villains or the UC timeline government if they chose to once again ignore the will of the people, with only Celestial Being as their check and counter against that happening again. Then the ELS invasion happens, as they sense the growing presence of humans who, through exposure to GN particles, have developed quantum brainwaves, a type of psychic communication ability which draws them to Earth as they seek to understand this foreign existence, but the ELS can only understand through assimilation and replication that is deadly to humans, which they do not realize at all. And so the invasion and subsequent conflict happens because two sides cannot communicate, and even using every technology advanced in the conflict with celestial being and the invaders is all ultimately worthless and piece by piece destroyed or absorbed. You cannot defeat them with power, tactics, or technology. No superweapon in any Gundam series is capable of exterminating them. Not truly, or in a way that would prevent the permanent damage that they would deal. You can destroy the drones, but the larger entities? Yeah, good luck with that. Multiple units try, and they just end up assimilated.
They are, in many ways, the Gundam equivalent to the threat of the Borg from Star Trek, only without the hostility towards other species.
You can't outrun them, you can't destroy them. If you damage them, the essence of what they are remains. They regenerate and keep coming. Eventually you will weaken, your reserves will be gone. They are relentless.
While the 00 Quantao does have the sheer destructive power to kill the main body, thus why it does top the charts of most powerful Gundams in the franchise, that does nothing to truly end the threat, but only delay it and push it off on someone else, and thus why it doesn't permanently resolve anything through that method. It's only ultimately stopped by using extra-normal means of communicating with them that are not available through normal means, as the ELS are so alien that they do not understand our languages. But once you bridge that with any type of ability to extra-normally communicate, it opens up humanity's first dialogues with another species, and through it, the true epiphany that there's far more to the universe than the small conflicts over a little blue ball.
And that is why it works, as it reinforces the central thematic narrative Gundam is trying to present through its showcasing of the atrocities of war. Tensions and conflict escalate the more people fail to communicate and present the truth of reality or believe in a lie, and that war is pointless in building a peaceful world, as it only acts as a consequence of irreconcilable differences, its only purpose being to free a subjugated group from the tyranny that plagues it, or the last resort among many horrible options of a victimized people. But it cannot and should not be allowed to spiral into a cycle of endless conflict, or as an excuse to subjugate others in response to your own experiences. The conflict with the ELS is perpetrated by both sides' inability to understand each other, and thus all hostilities end when in the movie, Setsuna bridges that gap. Because if he hadn't, humanity and everything they built would have been completely eradicated, as their weapons were proven to be truly worthless at protecting peace. The movie gave them an enemy humanity could not defeat through war, and that is what led to them obtaining the happy ending where all conflict had ended, and their society able to evolve to peacefully expand and truly escape Earth's gravity.
After all this time, we finally understand each other.
Of course, things are different in the track Super Robot Wars V took in adapting this, as the ELS are not being encountered in the AD dimension, but the NCC dimension, meaning that the existence of such alien entities may be consistent across them, considering the Mycenae Empire and Embryo's previous exploits in splitting the three Earths, and the invaders' presence across multiple realities as well. Regardless, this is out in deep, deep space as well, meaning the circumstances that led the ELS to Earth didn't happen here. But they are still coming at the fleets for the same reasons as they did before. The presence of those with psychic powers that are calling out to them, and they want to understand what is sending that signal. Setsuna, as his psychic powers actually allow him freaking empathy with other people and not just some ineffective combat boost, actually can sense elements of the ELS's desires, which can be expanded upon by having Setsuna fight and defeat 4 of their units before the stage ends. The collective units tipped off to their absorption abilities by them eating one of the Gamelan ships before we engage them. And while the absorption doesn't happen to our units in this game, it's still a thing that it's best to avoid contact with them where possible. Still, it's rough on everyone to have to fight like that, with the constant itching in the back of his head making Setsuna attempt the quantum burst to communicate with them via gene particles, And it's only because the ELS is a hive-minded species with all the units being drones that, well, the attempt to open a dialogue messes Setsuna up pretty badly. This happened in the movie too, rendering him comatose for a fair chunk of the film, but also with it taking Tierria's sacrifice to save him from being absorbed. That likewise happens here, the Raphael Gundam taking the place of the Quantao, and it being absorbed. However, because Tierria is a living terminal for the supercomputer Veda, he's already backed up his consciousness onto the Ptolemy, and is fine.
Makes me wish that the game had given Tierria a chance to interact with Evangelion's Rei, considering her status as a clone with disposable bodies herself. Difference is, her process of backing herself up causes there to be gaps in her memory. Still, there is an advantage to, well, not letting Tierria come back with another Raphael. See, if you keep Tierria in data form, they become a support pilot for the Quantao, meaning you get a second set of skills to make use of in boosting its capabilities even farther than if Setsuna alone stayed its pilot. And if you're worried about all the funds and tack points you spent buffing the Raphael, don't. Every single one of them gets refunded. As for points you spend in improving Tierria, like boosting their SP to use more skills, actually, I don't know if those stick on him after you transfer him to the Quantao, as I consider the Raphael to be kind of a garbage unit, so I never really deploy it, thus don't give it more points than I have to. But yeah, it's actually better for him to help Setsuna, as we already by this point have more units that we could possibly deploy at once.
In this version of events, though, the group were able to get Setsuna out faster, so he's not comatose this time around. But he is beating himself up for not thinking in the moment for what he did, and that it cost Tierria a body, though it is amusing that he just kept a spare in his room for just such an occasion. While Felt tries to help, it's actually Nine that comes to him to talk and keep him from reverting to the moody persona scene of the film. The tangents they end up on being on how, well, Setsuna doesn't really understand flowers, and yet his most treasured possession happens to be a certain glass-preserved one that Felt gave him. As for him, a boy that was manipulated to murdering his parents and walk blindly into war, it has come to represent its tranquility and peace that has always escaped him. Or really, the person he can be at peace with. And it's in pursuit of that peace that his frustrations overflowed in the face of this new threat to try and get them to back off, only for it to blow up in their face.
Setsuna will get another shot. Felt, though, needs to actually step up her game instead of always moving to the side. At least unless she wants to join Nana Mizuki's harem.
Analysis on the ELS is tabulated and presented in a meeting, Tierria confirming the ELS communicate on a similar frequency to all the other psychics here, and Setsuna's part in this going back to the original wishes of Aeolia Schemberg, Celestial Being's founder, believing that an alien life was out there, and through development of the GN tech and unlocking psychic potential via quantum brainwave expansion, they could get around first contact problems. But the issue here is, just since the ELS are similar to AI, the amount of information that poured into Setsuna's head was too much for him to process, and the film inflicting permanent brain damage on him to experience it. We're going to be encountering them again, so it's best they get some failsafes ready to prevent such an overload if they are going to stop further conflict. Thus, it's best to get Tierria in the Quantao to act as that limit for him. Though if they can't and the ELS try attacking an inhabited planet, it's thrown out there that they may have to use the wave motion gun. Something Eurisha is stunned to hear is something the Yamato can perform, even though she was awake for us doing it earlier. However, she calms down when everyone informs her that the weapon is not treated as a tool in their arsenal, but one of last resort that they'd rather explore other means before relying on it. Their hesitation to use it restoring some faith Eurisha has in them to act responsibly. The rest of the stage that follows from this briefing is not much of note. The Yamato crew finding another rogue Gamalian patrol they need to break through before rendezvousing with the Nesco, only complicated by Jamie once again bringing Chitose over for a fight. The dialogue further exploring that they're not just after the Yamato for its wave motion tech, but also Nine in the Vang next. And this is where the trap springs, Jamie having decided to ambush us here as it's home to a rock organism known as the Barano that drains the energy from ships and units to feed itself. Still, we rush through them and take on Chitose and Jamie, who gave up that their entire plan is tied to the Gardeem's own promise that, if Chitose helps them recover what they need, they will in turn supply the necessary resources to restore Earth themselves. A runaround to the whole Iskandar mission that sadly ignores how Embryo and Leonard's actions have endangered all the parallel Earths, and their world fusion won't be stopped by whatever the Gardeem would in turn do.
Then again, Chitose has not been around to know of that complication.
Jamie insists Chitose retreat after she takes some damage, the gynoid having some sense of self-preservation and not wanting to be killed off by her boss if they lost her, before likewise withdrawing herself with everyone else against her, though not before trying to flirt with Soji and 9.
Not sure if but if you want the harem ending for an OG character, you're going to have to wait until we get to Super Robot Wars T, and I introduce you all to Sagiri Satchan Sakurai.
It does not end well with her boss killing her and purging her line of any emotional data unneeded from her operation, which freaks Chitose out in the possibility that they could do that to her if she resists, even if the guy still seems to want to keep his part of their agreement. Over with Gamelas, amidst them putting Dummel back in command after he was ousted in the coup, they've started to see evidence of super civilization Gardeem still existing, as they're ancient and even beyond them in this universe. And them being around, for them, is big warning flags. Dessler thinking this made his old plan to bring the whole universe under his benevolent control a good one, as now he has forces he'll need to counter their resurgence, which in the past almost wiped out everyone but themselves.
Yeah, just keep telling yourself that.
But with that threat looming, it's an even bigger reason to finally end Earth Fleet Tenku. And to do that, Gamelas is sending their special corps for a final confrontation, which includes both the Neo-Zeon and Zanskar elements they'd recruited previously by the dumbass Goer, Zabine, for some reason, upon hearing of Dessler's grand scheme, going to abandon his devotion to both Crux Dougherty and Bararona, and work for him to bring domination to the universe.
You just know you can't trust anybody whose loyalty sways so easily. It shows they don't actually believe in anything but a string of excuses for them to act as they will. For Sabine, that's aristocracy.
Just contrast that with Kincaid, aka Seabook, in the exact next scene, as he's one of the pilots in this game that doubles as a cook, wanting when the battles all end to retire from piloting and open up a bakery. Yeah, he's not a career soldier, but it presents a good contrast. The cause he fights for being for the peace that will allow him to be able to live as he wants to off of the battlefield. Someone who fights for nothing, for no true end goal than an abstract, unfillable meaning, will be trapped fighting forever. This leads to their final confrontation in the depths of space, and I actually forgot to deploy Kincaid on this map, so Toby has to do it.
And I repeatedly do this. I forget those kinds of things since I really don't deploy Kincaid much at all. The F-91 with how it was structured in this game just kinda sucks, and by the time they can upgrade to a crossbow when Tobia gets the full cloth, it's a bit too late. So, Tobia, have that!
こんな状況になってもまだ貴族主義かスカールマキシマムドライブこのタイミングならいける私の手で正しき貴族の支配する世界を
Zabine has more Amuro biobrains with him, so everyone can experience how tough 1 Year War Amuro was for themselves. And we beat all of them pretty quickly. At least until we have yet another mid-battle interruption by space monsters.
At this hour? Jeez, and we don't even get the Gunbuster until Super Robot Wars T.
Actually, these are in fact more invaders. Yeah, the small outbreak on Europa we found earlier, those weren't signs they transitioned with Ryoma. That was foreshadowing that they existed in all universes, and it depends on getter concentrations where and when they manifest. This is them in their cosmic horror stage of their life cycle, where they can go out and destroy interstellar civilizations, though it wouldn't surprise me if the presence of the ELS in this quadrant of the galaxy were holding them back from properly infesting everything, considering they are both species that assimilate others, so it wouldn't surprise me if them trying to eat each other was a long-term conflict. While Zabine dies here, we are able to otherwise rescue Angelo from his own delusions that made him join the Gamelas, wanting revenge for making Frontal reconsider things, but his anger at that isn't a legit reason to throw his life away. So we managed to talk him down and get him out as a prisoner. So no, we aren't recruiting him as well. Though all the former Titan and G-Hound agents are complete assholes to him, though the UC protagonists are not any better in saying, he broke the spell of Char, as if Char was the bad guy all this, when I keep saying, no, he wasn't.
Is this a hashtag yet? Cause I feel like it should be with how frequently writers have to deal with UC Gundam content doing this. It just goes to show the souls who have failed to escape Earth's gravity. That line will never not be stupid and worthy of mocking, though.
This flips us over to the other side of the route split, with XF meeting with his own benefactor over the progress of his opponents through the Magellanic Cloud, and them sending their forces led by Purple to intercept and confront them. Though he himself is confused why his benefactor is so obsessed with ruining Maito's life like this, when there are so many they could focus their time on making suffer.
Shorthand, they're the bad guys. We will get into his benefactor's reasonings later.
So yeah, we have a big confrontation out in space with more of Dr. Wolfgang's perfected mass production units led by Purple. The Nadesco and Shin Dragon manage to pair their powers to boson jump their division of the unit away to another planet to hide out, baffled by XF's men dogging them when, the space-time compression is screwing everyone over, and that includes them. Though Akito points out that, by the use of Super Robot series tropes, some evils just don't care if the world burns. Purple leads XF's forces down on the planet, appearing in person to screw with Maito's head when he's having a private moment with Sally. The villain Rocker sending Wolfgang after us first, to the scientist's dismay as again, he's an angry scientist. But he's not completely insane to not recognize the crisis, though he's dead if he doesn't help. The same with Catherine Vuitton and Mifune, forced simply due to their previous association. And when they're shot down, Purple takes the stage, proclaiming that he is bathed in the aura of evil.
Oh great, you'd be a natural counter to Base.exe in the first 3 Battle Network games then. Well, that or be Base.exe in the back half Battle Network games. Either works.
And once more, I'm not that far off. The Aura of Evil is a regeneration field that keeps their units moving even past the point they should be destroyed. I one-shot one of them with a Stoner Sunshine, and it kept shambling along. And to make it worse, Baron Ashura, revived by the General of Darkness if you'll remember, joins in with a force of Mycenae, and when Maito declares this won't stop them, Purple mocks Maito by stating, evil only exists to act as opposition to the hero, thus they are then the cause of all the world's evils.
Not really. I mean, in the sense of playing with story tropes to have a hero of a story, you need to have villains to oppose them, and My Guy's genius really does come from how it plays with story tropes like that, but in a real-world sense, no. Heroes come about because someone is doing something bad completely independently of whatever the person who becomes the hero is doing. And then they cross paths, and the hero feels the selfless duty to help those the villain is harming. History constantly has that cycle present itself naturally again and again, because there is always going to be someone selfish and uncaring towards others that inflicts themselves on other people, and that makes them a bad person. Blaming a hero for what the villain does is old hat, but it rarely is ever true. It only happens in bad stories where the protagonist just screws up that much with no awareness that they are, or them calling themselves a hero is a blanket masking their more selfish acts or oblivious abuses, which are not, by role, heroic. The only legit example where one could work with that is if they're the root cause of all the suffering before they take on the role of the hero. And it can go either way in that case, depending on how they act after learning such. Do they continue to perform acts that will continue the cycle of suffering and stay oblivious to it, or refuse to care and take responsibility after they learn their role in causing it? Or do they turn away from the acts that cause such? If it's the former two examples, congratulations! They're not the hero, and it's still a bad story, as you've now made your protagonist an immoral sociopath, only truly out for themselves, and thus not the hero of their story. If it's the latter, they may have facilitated the malice, but if they're actively opposing those doing wrong now and stay in opposition to them, then they serve the role of a hero seeking absolution for what they did and acknowledge their role in it was wrong and have coincidentally stopped doing whatever it was that instigated their part in the cycle. Key being, they stopped doing what was their part in that cycle. There are still those who don't do that, and thus they're still lumped in the former camp.
This likewise follows from that. Maito's antagonists exist in the story because he is the hero, but Maito existing is not the cause of their malicious actions. That's their own choices compounded by someone else directing them all to be Maito's antagonists. What Purple is saying would only be true if Maito himself were paying them all to do evil things through the use of middlemen like Exeb for his own glorification, and that just isn't so. But of course, this is all intended to try and make this one big
The all is lost moment!
And give Maito a heroic blue screen. But personally, acts like this just don't work for me in a story unless the hero actually does something wrong enough inside of it to warrant it. The strongest two incidents I can bring to bear where you could count as the story playing with that correctly and not screwing it up being Commoner Double and Exade. Both examples were the hero that is the root origin of the devices or creatures that serve as the antagonists of the series, being victimized and it being part of such as creation. And it being another's infliction of themselves upon them, that is the actual root evil, that is the big bad of the series. But it still follows into what I said is the functional way to work this. Had either learned of the harm they did or are doing and said, you know what, not my problem, and just kept doing what was screwing everyone over for their own self-serving self-interest, well, then you get Sogo Tokiwa from Commoner ZO, that series' simultaneous protagonist and its actual villain. While we beat on the Kadora that are not protected, Purple tries to ram into Maito that he's the true villain, up until Akito intervenes, taking a fatal blow for Maito instead, and telling him all about Gai Daidoji, a short-lived character from Nadesco that so believed in the reality of story tropes that he tried to live by the best traits of them, only dying because he was betrayed by one of their own. But he honestly believed in people every day trying to become their best selves, and that's what the cast keeps seeing in Maito every day. He does not have the malice in him to allow or instigate the root origins of malice in these worlds, and it's only if he falters like Purple's trying to make him do, will he ever act to enable the evil he opposes. Thus Maito gets his will to fight back, and by concentrating his spirit, he breaks through the aura of evil on Purple's unit, which disables it from working on any of the rest of the protected units. Purple's forces withdraw, though they abandon the former members of the DG Alliance on the planet, where they are in turn picked up by a character named Koros from Daitarn 3 that I know nothing about. As the crew takes some downtime to repair and refuel, and the cross-age characters once more pay witness to Hilda and Tusk banter over their vying affections for Ange, we are reminded that Exev's not the only rogue antagonist out here. Embryo's dimension-shifting abilities could always plant Leonard and his amalgam forces among them at any time. And sure enough, we see them remotely trigger Sophia to once more hijack Kaname's body and overwhelm her with guilt over things that, as I once more have to readdress, are not her fault to begin with. And in doing so, pull her out of the ship right into Leonard's clutches, where they can force Kaname out of control of herself again into being a doll for Sophia to possess.
Like, why even rescue her several stages back to seemingly wrap this part of the plotline if you're only going to undo that? Have Kaname be captured again, and render you subverting this all be moot. We were past this stage in things a long time ago!
And I'm so hostile to them doing this here, as it's all the same crap between Leonard, Kaname, and Sosuke we already went through ad nauseum to repeat it all. Nothing is different. It's the same argument to Kaname to leave that we already refuted, that the Whispered are not and have never been the cause of war and conflict, as it predates them, and any changes they could have made to any of time through Sophia's own actions and feeding them far future tech and knowledge aren't applicable. So why is it working again now? And it's not like anything else new comes in here from the Full Metal Panic side that needed to be here either. Kalinin coming in again to mock Tess and Sosuke that is redundant. It's only after they step to the side that we get better focus content, with the Getter team finding metal beast form invaders that were brought here by Embryo, who's brought into his service Stinger and Cohen, two scientists that were Sao Tome's colleagues in Getter Robo research, that were completely 100% infested by Vaders and amalgamated themselves with the parasites in their view as superior beings. With all they need now is a massive infusion of energy to reach their peak evolution, which they believe can be supplied by the wave motion engine.
In Getter Robo Armageddon, they get the same effect from stealing a spare Getter Dragon that was overcharged from being part of the Shin Dragon, and throwing the entire unit, reactor and all, into Jupiter to create a Getter radiation sun the invaders wanted to use to evolve endlessly. Considering they almost got the same result from turning a nuclear weapon into a get-ray bomb, there is a certain sense to that.
They withdraw so the other invaders can take focus in distracting us from Leonard's forces, that all are focused on trying to assassinate Sosuke in order to permanently force Kaname into despair so she'll give up on fighting Sophia. As this is the other side of a route split, we also see Jamie and Chitose come in here as well. Once more, both routes are equally canon by events, with their sole difference being what group Soji and 9 with, so events caused by their presence are constant and instant regardless. But the only other thing of note here is, as we move to the end of the stage, if you deploy Kurtz, he has a shootout with Casper, the sniper of Leonard's amalgam team that actually trained Kurtz, taking a shot meant for Sosuke, and firing back on Casper to take him out. Casper's unit being superior, but of the two, Kurtz being the better sniper, shooting Casper down before he likewise passes out, declaring his love for Melissa Mao.
It is a meaningful, powerful scene with how it's presented, which is only hurt by how, well in English, the character is most associated with the scumbag. So empathy for the character has been irreparably damaged, and it's really hard to care about him as a result. I'm sure if the final volumes ever get adapted into animation, that the replacement voice actor for him will have a far better time in salvaging the character with the material supplied.
With all the enemies taken down, Exev appears, and using his benefactor's power, he cracks the planet, trying to blame this all on Maito as well, but again, he's not responsible for jack shit here, and everyone calls him out on that. Especially Joe, who Exev has it out for because, for some reason, he hates the drill on the front of the Goryu. Never wanted it on the front of the mech, and he hated Wolfgang put it on?
A characterization, once again, born from Backroom, Takara, and Sunrise executive antics Mike Guine was making fun of, since Goryu's based on Dai Atlas, whose vehicle mode, drill, was kind of useless.
But yeah, Exev cracks the planet in an attempt to kill us, and it fails. Everyone making off the planet, with the last to leave being Sosuke, as he has a final bout with Kalinin over his betrayal, and ultimately killing him as Kalinin tries to make excuses about his actions, all tied to siding with Leonard just so he could get his dead wife back in the world Leonard would create. But frankly, it's not much of an excuse.
But with these two fighting on a world that's collapsing, I can't help but think of a certain movie.
I have had enough of you!
With that done, Sosuke joins the rest of the crew in orbit over the now broken world, and soon joined by Wolfgang and the others, who as a peace offering in turn saved Kurtz's life as well. So, happy ending on that end? Well, not so much, as this is where Exev comes in with the last of his forces for one final face-off, in order for him to kill off everyone he hates that just seems to keep surviving. Wolfgang is fully on board with doing everything to take down his former boss, and actually having made plans in the event Exev ever backstabbed him. As again, Wolfgang is not a bad guy. Thus he sent over to the Nadesico to get work on his final invention to fully counteract the aura of evil that Exev's also protected by. And it's far in excess to the one Purple was sporting. And with us holding off his remaining drones and minions, an analysis of a counterwave that manifested during the battle against Purple's evil aura, Wolfgang creates his greatest device, a thought wave amplifier that counteracts malice with the power of innocence.
What? That's straight from Mike Guine. Granted, innocent means you're often oblivious to malice and can have the inherent naivete of innocence manipulated by malice, so it's not exactly a counter-frequency. Kindness is a better descriptor for what they're trying to grasp, but it's not exactly the best descriptor either.
But regardless, the device actually uses Sally as the conduit for this counterfield, so as we take this all down to Exev, and he concentrates his aura of evil into endlessly regenerating his ultimate Imperial Robo that is so strong it even acts as a beacon to call in the Great General of Darkness back out of hell as reinforcements. Well, the power of Sally's innocence literally cripples anything bearing malice in the system, empowering up everything and everyone with a righteous will in their souls. While this is also supposed to be one final climactic standoff with the Great General being here, this is not his last appearance, so I'm kind of leaving their part in this out, beyond Tetsuya beating his butt again, leading to the General gaining respect from the Mazinger pilots. And with each defeat of a source of malice in the area, well, Exev just grows weaker and weaker, until Maito can finally unleash upon him his ultimate attack.
Maito-san, 私の力を受け取って。
感じる これはサリーの思いダブル動輪剣。
ダブルドリンケ
正義の力を
今ここに。
マイトガインのどこにこれほどの力があるというのだ。
Oh, but this is not the end for Exif. After all, Joe still needs justice for his own family's death. And if you remember to deploy him, Maito lets him right at him.
あの世へ行け、エグゼム。最強の技で蹴りをつけてやる。まずはミサイルをプレゼント。こいつでとどめだ。
Right in the crotch.
だからドリルは取れと言ったのだ。
With Exif dead, the DG Alliance joins up with us to support saving the worlds any way they can, as their lives are no longer being threatened, which was their stumbling block before. What's more, showing Wolfgang is just being misunderstood, as he's all in on helping the heroes, so his own subordinates, which have been with him through thick and thin, can have their own shot at truly living. But it's still better to not have these petty people being distractions against the real task at hand. Thus, all tasks are cleared as the two fleets join up again, as the final road to Iskandar has opened.
Which means, yes, next time, we'll conclude this Supermaster Review series as the final stage of Super Robot Wars V are finally before us.
Next time, on the finale of Super Robot Wars V, 9's missing percent. That which true heroes believe in.